Among the women painters at this time were Rachel Royce, Maria van Oosterwijk, and Clara Peters. Rachel Royce was born in The Hague in the mid-17th century and painted until she was well into her 80s. Despite having 10 children, she achieved significant prominence and success in her artistic practice and sold her paintings for more than twice as much as Rembrandt sold his for during his lifetime. And her works are in collections of major museums across the world, but she's often been left out of art history books. Her paintings, though, evidence her remarkable abilities. Perhaps due to the influence of her father, who was a botanist, she was meticulous about the anatomical correctness of the plants and fruits that she depicted. However, she would playfully mix flowers which bloomed in different seasons, apple blossoms and orange lilies, for example, injecting her own imagination and fantasy into the scenes. And there's a real sense of abundance in her paintings. For example, in Still Life with Fruit, Birds, Nests and Insects, which is on the screen here, the succulent grapes and jewel-like corns spill out heavily onto the ground. The stone column and the tree which stand side by side juxtapose man-made structures and the natural world, the domesticated and the sort of untamed. And there's also a huge amount of drama and theatricality in this painting, with the insects crawling over the fruits and plants and the little lizard in the corner poking its head into a nest where there's a cracked egg. I'm not sure what's going on there. And there's also some amazing wildlife present in Maria van Oosterwijk's flower still life from 1669. The dragonfly, which disappears almost into the flower on which it's perched, and the butterflies that are dotted around the bouquet. Butterflies famously have a very short lifespan, sometimes just a couple of weeks. So in this painting, they function as a sign of the brevity of life. The red admiral butterfly in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a recurring feature in Van Oosterwijk's work, is also symbolic of Christ's resurrection. Using these rich, luminous colours, Van Oosterwijk depicts the bouquet sort of cascading up out of the vase, which is itself is almost obscured in the darkness. And the black background emphasises the brilliance of these flowers, their glowing pinks, yellows, and blues. And the towering composition of the flowers makes them seem almost like living, breathing entities. Van Oosterwijk was denied membership in the Painters Guild on the basis that she was a woman. However, she was a very canny businesswoman and was popular with European royalty, selling her works to the kings of England, France, and Poland. Clara Peters was also a commercially successful artist, and 4 of her works ended up in the Spanish Royal Collection. She had a very distinctive and highly detailed style. Like in Van Oosterwijk's paintings, there's a striking contrast between the brightly lit objects and the dark backgrounds. Her paintings often depict wines and fruits, vegetables and fish spread out invitingly on a table. And it's thought that this painting, Still Life with Sparrowhawk, Fowl, Porcelain and Shells, is the first still life of dead game. The birds have been sort of floppily placed in the basket, mirroring the messy arrangement of shells, all neatly lined up in a row, much like the stacked porcelain bowls. The sparrowhawk, the only living creature in the painting, looks out suspiciously as though guarding the other dead birds. Not very much is known about Peter's life. Even the year of her birth is approximate. However, one of the ways in which she lives on is through the tiny self-portraits which she hid in many of her still lifes in the form of reflections on shiny objects. For example, Still Life with Flowers, Gilt Goblets, Coins and Shells, there are as many as 10 selfies painted on one of the gilt goblets. In these self-portraits, she wears a headdress, ruff and high-necked dress, and is holding a palette. This may have been her way of asserting her authorship of the painting. It was quite common at the time for women's works to be misattributed to their male counterparts, but it may also be a demonstration of her skill in being able to depict herself on such a minute scale. Fast forward 250 years to 19th century France, and there was another full-blown revival of still life, interest in still life, most notably among the Impressionists. The Impressionist style focused on an accurate depiction of movement and light in its changing qualities and favoured ordinary subject matter. However, apart from Cézanne, few Impressionists had an enduring interest in still life because it fit with their aesthetic in terms of the ordinariness of the subject matter, but the fact that it was inherently static and an indoor genre meant that it was less appealing to these artists who were very interested in movement and painting in nature, on plein air. For Cézanne, however, still life was practically an obsession. He painted over 200 throughout his life, and by choosing simple, everyday subjects and repeating them over and over and over, he could focus entirely on his style. Now, I know that Cézanne is not a woman artist, but I think he's a key figure in the history of still life, and he's also the artist who inspired my personal love of the genre. This is his famous still life with plaster Cupid, which is in the Courtaulds collection and currently on display in the Cézanne exhibition at Tate Modern. Can anyone notice anything a bit weird about the big red onion next to the Cupid? It is huge. That is one strange element of it. But there's also something else, which is that the bulb of the onion is on the table next to the apples and the Cupid, while the stalk seems to be part of the still life painting in the background. The blue cloth too is both part of the painting which we're looking at and also the painting within a painting. So by blurring what is art and what is reality, Cézanne is meditating on the meaning of art. The rough, visible brushstrokes also show the process of creating this painting. It's not supposed to be a faithful representation of reality, but a self-conscious statement about the artifice of art. Cézanne's use of colour is also interesting. The Cupid looks white to us, but if you examine it more closely, it's made up of a mixture of blues, greens, pinks, yellows, and blacks. In this work, therefore, colour is not used in a representational way. This is because Cézanne was more interested in objects for their formal qualities than for what they represented, and still life was perfectly suited to his purposes. Because of the ordinariness of an object like an apple, it could be used as the site for experimentation with form and colour. And Cézanne treated these objects in an almost abstract way. In the painting, the real space of the studio becomes a series of interrelated forms and shapes. Paradoxically, the prosaic nature of its subject matter means that still life is the ideal genre for this kind of artistic experimentation. Cézanne was conscious of that. He allegedly said, "With an apple I will astonish Paris." He also astonished London with his apples. Cézanne's works were very popular in England and had a profound effect on modernist artists such as Virginia Woolf's sister Vanessa Bell, who painted two paintings which are very reminiscent of Cézanne's still life with apples. Other of Bell's contemporaries include Nina Hamlet and Dora Carrington, who were also drawn to still life and used the genre to communicate coded and sometimes subversive messages. I won't talk too much about these works because Claudia will be speaking about modernism and still life later. I'd also highly recommend a book by Rebecca Burrell titled This Dark Country, which came out last year and which thrillingly analyses still life works by women artists of the early 20th century, reading them through a feminist and queer lens. But now I want to focus on our current exhibition and the works in it which engage with all the questions around still life which I've mentioned so far. They contend with the tensions at the heart of still life between the private and the public, between nature and culture, life and death. And in their compositions, they pare back or abstract their scenes or fill them with multiple competing layers. They freeze moments in time or create dynamism that challenges the idea of stillness. Half of the works in the exhibition are from the Women's Art Collection and the other half are loans by some fantastic modern contemporary artists, and they span from the 1940s to the present day. One of them, which was created specially for the exhibition, was finished only about a month before it opened. And many of the works look back at the history of art and history of still life and comment on it critically and often humorously. But they also speak to some of the most urgent questions of our day, the pandemic, climate change, the legacy of colonialism in the 21st century. So now I want to take a closer look at some of the themes that emerge from them. So at first glance, Rachel Nicholson's still life in pink and grey seems quite unassuming. Even the title is understated. However, when you look closely, there's a lot going on stylistically, including many different confrontations between colours, the black and the white, textures, smooth and kind of mottled, and styles, detailed and then abstracted. And as if to symbolise these various encounters, two cockerels face off at each other on the teacup and look as if they might be gearing up for a fight. Rachel Nicholson, who is the daughter of Barbara Hepworth and Ben Nicholson and is now almost 90 years old, mainly works in still life and landscape. And her still lifes often depict simple crockery, mugs, cups and saucers, which are patterned in various ways and set against quite simple backdrops. But unlike the usual framing device of a table, the backgrounds in her still lives themselves are often striped, taking on the appearance of these domestic objects, so they dictate the whole atmosphere of the paintings. In contrast to how pared back Nicholson's work is, the ones on either side are hyper-detailed. In Hilary Peckus's vibrant painting, patterns and shapes clash or echo each other, and still life has been an ongoing preoccupation for Peckus. She said, "I find that there is a lot of freedom within the parameters of the still life. It is a place to start, but there are infinite possibilities." She uses photos and Instagram posts as her starting point and then plays with her source images, editing the compositions and exaggerating the colours. The alarm clock references the symbolism of timepieces in 17th century Dutch paintings. And you'll notice that, well, actually, I didn't originally notice it until someone pointed out to me, but it is, I think, a really interesting point, which is that the clock is set at 10 past 10, which is an advertising convention. And one theory for its existence is that it's thought that watches showing a time setting resembling a smiling face would enhance viewers' emotional response and their intention to buy. So it's possible that Peckus is making a subtle comment here on modern consumerism. And on the other side of Nicholson's painting is Maisie Cousin's photographic work, Breakfast. In all of her work, Maisie plays with colour, composition and scale, and in Breakfast, perfectly formed roses intermingle with cherry stones and egg yolks against a pitch black background, which has a very classical feel to it and is reminiscent of the backgrounds of paintings by Rachel Royce and Maria van Oosterwijk. Then there's the Shard of Blue Glass, which I originally thought was a pill packet, even wrote the text for the gallery guide mentioning it as a pill packet, and others have interpreted as a piece of Lego, for example. What it actually is I think is unimportant, basically, because Maisie includes it here for its formal qualities. She said that she saw it lying around in her house and decided to include it in the work because of her interest in its colour and shape and how it interacts with the other objects. So in this photograph, natural and man-made objects again come together and appear both domesticated and kind of wild and unruly. Maisie's very interested in the effect of her work on the viewer. She carefully composes her works, which often feature food, flowers and waste, and which have both seductive and repulsive qualities. And she herself, sometimes when taking her photographs, has a quite visceral reaction to the items that she's taking photos of, particularly if they're waste. So sometimes she's even been known to sort of retch while she's taking these photos. And she says that nature is always beautiful and also disgusting. Another theme is self-portraiture, which is used to, I think, very different effects by three of the artists in this exhibition. First of all, Shani Rhys-James' painting, which features an eclectic group of objects, some of which are characteristic of still life, the plates and bowls, the pile of books, the empty candlestick, while others are quite surprising, an upright pumpkin, a mouldy banana and snake's head. And in the corner is a vase of flowers. Sorry, I've lost my place. So at the back is the vase of flowers, behind which lurks an image which could be a painting within the painting, or could be a mirror reflecting the artist's face staring back out at the viewer. And the expression on her face is quite reproachful. The whole atmosphere of the painting is quite charged and a bit menacing. The rough, rapid brushstrokes create a sense of dynamism and make some of the elements of the painting difficult to make out. So when you finally spot the self-portrait, it could create a slight sense of shock. And then next is Phyllis Floyd's Picture and Bags, which depicts a line of shopping bags, envelopes, and a jug set against this simple background and the shiny lacquered table. Since the age of just 10 years old, Phyllis has worked in the genre of still life, painting objects like jars, dish towels, and kitchen utensils from observation. And again, she very carefully composes her tableau, often returning repeatedly to the same subject matter and experimenting with different perspectives and interactions between the objects. And she aims for her paintings to be read as abstractions, much like Cézanne. And it was in this spirit that Phyllis created the self-portraits in Picture and Bags, which are reflected in the jug. When I went to her studio last summer in New York, she told me that she was simply painting what she saw, and only afterwards realised that it was she herself that she painted. And I love this idea of a kind of accidental self-portrait. Sekai Machache's self-portrait is much more deliberate. She is front and centre of this reconstructed still life, which includes many of the genre's characteristic elements: tableware, flowers, food, and candles. It's an extremely complex work with many layers of meaning, which Sekai will unpack a bit during her talk. But one effect of the insertion of herself into the composition is its disruption of the stillness of the still life. Sekai is standing perfectly still, returning the viewer's gaze, while the liquid that she's pouring from the porcelain carafe falls down with a force which means it spills over the teacup's edge. So there's this simultaneous stillness and movement, which is very compelling. And next, I want to speak about the theme of life and death, which has always been such an important part of still life. In Ali Panting's surreal still life, the protagonist is a gutted haddock, and though it's been quite roughly cut down the middle, it looks very clean and sanitized. The other objects on the table lie at quite impossible angles, as though laid out for inspection by the painting's viewers, similar to Clara Peter's compositions. And her still lifes are often rendered in very sharp lines and bold colours. And fish is, again, a common feature of Dutch still life paintings. I resisted the temptation to buy you some fish, some gutted fish to paint in your still life session later, but they are definitely a recurring feature. And Katie Stubbs, who's a brilliant young ceramics artist, came to see the collection in the lead up to the exhibition and was particularly taken with Ali Panting's haddock, which at the time was hanging in the college library. And she's created a contemporary reinterpretation of it in her piece, There's Been a Terrible Accident, which depicts a cardboard box containing a budgerigar that has been decapitated. And she was inspired by the piles of game and songbirds in Dutch still lifes, like in Clara Peter's painting, and gives this trope a darkly comic twist. And many of her recent works have featured dead animals who've been sort of killed in quite gruesome ways as a way of exploring the idea of human callousness and the fact that domesticated animals are at the whim of their human owners. But she herself is a huge animal lover. She's got several chickens and a little chihuahua. So she's and is a vegetarian as well. So she's making a comment here about the way in which we treat animals, which might have been, I was sort of speculating about whether that was a subtext in Clara Peter's work. I think the bird who's sort of guarding the other dead birds might be a sort of a hint at that, but definitely in Katie's work, that's very overt this interaction between humans and animals, which so often is kind of placed into relief in still life. There's also a very overt sense of violence in Anna Leibler-Lewis's Misha Bleach, which is conveyed through the Soviet military hat and the explosion in the middle of the composition, which again shatters the stillness of the still life. And this features other objects which relate to Anna's Ukrainian heritage, to vodka bottles, bleach, a Misha teddy bear. The work was made in 2012 after the Olympics were in Russia, and so you can see the Olympic sign on the Misha's belly. So it's again a sort of branded object. And though this painting was created 10 years ago, it has huge relevance now and takes on a real poignancy in light of the current war in Ukraine. The explosion actually originated as an accident in the painting process. Anna's paintbrush sort of went in the wrong direction, but she decided to transform it into a real focal point of the composition, and she now mainly works in abstraction and is very interested in the process of creating art. I placed this work at the end of the exhibition because I wanted it to quite literally end on a bang. So I'm going to also end my talk there and pass over to Sekai. Thank you very much.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Naomi for inviting me to be here to take part of in this event that offers space to discuss the themes of the exhibition, Life in Still Life. What's happening? Bear with me a sec, just need to come off of the Wi-Fi. To provide some context for the work that I have displayed in the exhibition, I'd like to introduce my project, The Divine Sky. The Divine Sky utilises allegory and performance to tell a complicated history through poesis, immersive storytelling and photography. This work denotes a process of inscribing and reinscribing thought through automatic drawing with ink on paper, indigo pigment on fabric, performance to camera, layering and overlaying. This series took form during the COVID-19 lockdowns when restrictions to our movements called for establishing new ways of working and structuring artistic output. The Divine Sky project is underpinned by an exploration of the colour blue, and in particular the allure of indigo. All titles of the project are taken from the 12 stages of the ancient West African indigo dyeing process, a process in which fabric is dipped into a vat of indigo over and over again, producing a range of pigments from the lightest blue to the darkest blues. These are as follows: 1. Blue of nothingness. 2. A hint of blue. 3. Milky blue. 4. Lively blue. 5. Azure blue. 6. Blue of the horizon. 7. Ultramarine. 8. Assertive blue. 9. The divine sky. 10. Light divine sky. And 11. Deep divine sky. I chose to work with these titles to create a body of work that showcases the multidisciplinary practice that I work with, including my first ever, well, second ever film, Profound Divine Sky. The titles actually came from Abu Bakr Fanana, who is an incredible artist and who works with textiles and specifically indigo. He has a farm in Nigeria where he grows indigo plants and processes them for his practice. Some examples also of the West African practice of indigo dye, which I drew quite a lot of inspiration from for the project. I did a lot of automatic drawing when I made the project, starting with a lot of ink drawing and then working on fabric directly with indigo using sumi brushes. I also created a series of batik pieces as well. The first photographic work for the project was titled The Divine Sky, and it utilised the fabric that I painted as the backdrop, and the ink drawings that I'd done beforehand are placed in the sort of circular spaces in the centre there. So in A Hint of Blue, there's a particular focus on the relationship of to indigo and cobalt blue, a pigment traditionally associated with blue willow chinaware. Appearing during the Tang dynasty, blue willow porcelain has a rich and important legacy. However, it has since been appropriated and turned into a cheap commodity as it was reproduced and sold across the world, and over the years it has lost a lot of its value and can be found in markets, car boot sales, and even sold on drop lots on eBay, which is where I got quite a lot of my my pieces for the photograph. Of course, there are still examples of priceless versions of the original Chinese porcelain, and of course the famous Dutch Delft brand, which has appropriated the notion of high-value blue willow porcelain for some time. A Hint of Blue moves us into a domestic setting, echoing the sense of claustrophobia and isolation many of us felt during lockdown. For those of us who were fortunate enough to have shelter in our homes, surrounded by all of our things that we had accumulated in our lives, there was not much to do but accumulate more things, more hobbies, more ways to pass the time. That seemed both static and endless. So I want to talk a little bit about still life, obviously since this is what the exhibition here is focusing on. For most of us, when we consider still life as a medium, we would likely recognise it as the first medium that we engage with when it comes to visual arts. Still life offers a uniquely simple and effective way to explore the process of observing and of rendering objects from the three-dimensional space onto a two-dimensional plane, creating a synergy between the eye and the hand, the object and the mark of the artist. Still life has a rich history and has been central to arts education for centuries, with an almost unshakable and inescapable positioning as a fundamental for learning perfecting technique. But however unshakable and fundamental it is, still life as a medium does not and will not remain static. It has been and continues to be approached in a myriad of different ways by artists working across a wide range of media. I find that photography is one of the most interesting ways to capture still life because it returns us to the early Renaissance and Baroque masters, artists such as Rembrandt and Caravaggio, who painted using the chiaroscuro technique, which is a method that uses shadows and a single light source to create depth and drama. Still life scenes that were painted in dark rooms, lit by a single window, while faces and portraits were illuminated with a golden candlelit glow. Studies that were all about light, composition, and the particular quality of the objects captured in the image. Photography as a medium is wholly dependent on light as the as the photographic process is one of pulling light into the mechanism of the camera to make a print like a relief based on the areas that are not exposed to light. This is why techniques such as cyanotype and pinhole photography have regained such popularity in recent times. The simplest form of photographic work can be the most effective and reveals the magic of the camera, demystifying it in a way. Many have contested photography's ability to render reality. However, recent technological advancements have almost rendered the human eye redundant, creating images that can be described as hyper-realistic. Of course, the photograph remains a static image, a frozen moment in time, captured at a particular angle, offering a very specific perspective. I feel that when still life and photography meet, the quality of the images has the potential to be quite mesmerising, especially when the artist has a really keen understanding of the photographic process, an intuition for working with light, and a respect for still life as a medium. Of course, artists are not the only people who have utilised the medium of still life. For centuries, patrons of the arts have used still life as a form of conspicuous consumption, a means to showcase their wealth and power. An example of how this conspicuous consumption continues to this day are these photographic images from a Harrods advert that I found while doing my research for this work. This display of wealth and opulence aims to reassert hierarchies of taste, culture, and class. Although inviting to some, I found it quite distasteful when I considered the timing of viewing the piece. I felt compelled to respond to it directly with this work that invites and seduces the viewer in a similar way, but upon further inspection is actually asking us to reconsider these kinds of examples of conspicuous consumption and the potential to aim for something more, something better. Art collectors, public and private audiences all have a vested interest in still life remaining an important investment within the art market. In many ways, I believe that still life is a medium that has the potential to both reassert and flatten hierarchies. Blue Willow China and Indigo in relation to the legacies of colonialism and slavery has been a really fundamental aspect of this photographic series. In still life, the object becomes the central focus, standing in for a landscape, for the figure, for human emotions. The object must become a non-human participant or a conduit of the concept behind the work. We as viewers can ask the object for its symbolic meaning. The skull, the pitcher of water, the pomegranate. What happens to one object when another one is placed next to it? Why is this object slightly hidden from view? Why is that object here when it seems so out of place? When reading still life, we have to ask ourselves questions, simple questions that often reveal grander and more complex ideas. Questions about what is present and what is absent in the frame. In much of art history, there has been a sense of absence that also tells its own story. In most still life work, the artist is only present in their mark making or in reflections. So when approaching a hint of blue, I chose to be present in the frame because for my presence as a black woman and as a contemporary African diasporic artist in this work is not accidental, it is imperative. When making this work, I was thinking a lot about history and how we trace the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade and the colonial era. Since so much is omitted from the archive, the process of research becomes one of excavation, of searching. As Alice Walker stated, as a black person and a woman, I don't read history for facts, I read it for clues. In my reading, I found that when looking at these histories, a useful strategy is to focus on one particular area, a particular commodity that was part of the trade that almost sanctioned the enslavement and exploitation of black and brown bodies. The impact that these non-human participants, such as sugar, tobacco, cotton, and indigo, had at that time. A single commodity is a good place to start because it forms the foundations for not only why this exploitation took place, but offers an explanation as to why it was allowed to continue for so long. I use allusions to ritual in this work to present some of my own personal healing processes as a way to catalyse these experiences of looking and feeling disturbed by the world around me and responding by creating images. A good friend of mine and researcher Adebussola Ramsey told me that you have to follow the money, inviting me in a research session that we had together last year to look at the compensation record to find out who was compensated for lost earnings due to the abolition of slavery. She said that if I wanted to fill in the gaps in the archive, I had to follow the money to where it would lead me. Adebussola is rather eloquently quoted as stating, "Obfuscation of reality upholds white supremacy," a point that I feel is important to always remember when I'm making work. The work is not to obfuscate or to lure anyone into a false sense of security, but rather it is intended as an invitation for us all to come to terms with our histories in a collective manner, to look not just for our own pleasure or entertainment, but as the starting point to an ongoing and potentially endless process of unlearning the false narratives of conquest and discovery that have so often been deployed to obscure the harsh truths of our past and present condition. I wrote a poem titled A Renegotiation of Time around the same period when I made this work, and I think it's a good way to end this presentation. So I'm just going to read it for you now. A renegotiation of time. In our enforced domesticity, there is a renegotiation of time. We awake not always in the day, dream-worn and in chaotic bliss, we carry forth our inner impositions through the relationship we hold to the object in our life. We are only us, the great indoors. Windowsill, bedside lamp, warm carpet, dark moonlit cityscape through glass pane longing. There is no escape from all of this. Imagining a way out is futile. The country ticks on, the lived realization of the tacky posters, mugs and flags that repeat to us in earnest words to keep calm and carry on. Even when the whole damn thing has fallen apart, even when it's just too much of the same, even as they chip away at freedoms hard fought and won for what? If we could walk the streets at night, hands held open, asking for more or less of what we deserve. In these moments, I just sit still, eyes closed, concentrate on my breath, and try my best not to imagine worse. A renegotiation of time, as though time was ever a real dimension, felt and not just received as instructions on a flat round surface. The only thing that was real about it was the shadows playing. We are here in our homes, waiting.
Thank you so much, Sekai, for that beautiful presentation. We're now going to begin our break. So everyone, please feel free to help yourselves to tea and coffee and to go over to the still life drawing area and also down to the exhibition. And we will resume the talks at 4 p.m, which will mean that so Claudia will do hers for half an hour and then we'll go straight to Q&A. So we might finish the day a bit earlier than expected at